Hey guys, figured I'd do a little update here on one of my finds. If you don't know what we're looking at here, we're looking at the gauge pod for the 72 Mustang fastback. You can kind of see there, I have it taken out. I don't know if you can really see, it's pretty dark. But I found something pretty interesting here. I was online and I'm getting ready to purchase a couple of parts for this car because I'm continuing with the restoration now that I have the garage finished. And I found something really interesting here that I'm not sure if came from the factory. But here we have the original bezel that came out of this car. And what I found was pretty unique or interesting is that this sits in the car like this. If I can lean it up here for us. It sits in the car like this, and basically the piece that they sell on the websites that I'm looking at is a one-piece glass or plastic cover that shields the gauges from being able to make contact. That's the official protective clear plastic cover that happens on over the gauges. But what I found was interesting on my Mustang, and the reason why I actually started looking, is that if you look really closely here, I'm going to try to throw the light on here so you can see it. You'll notice how it's real ugly, and where that chrome ring is, it looks like goopy and nasty. It's because there's silicone. Someone has siliconed these gauge windows. And I originally thought that this is how the car came, and then whoever had the gauge pod out decided to silicone them shut because they couldn't reinstall it. But upon closer investigation here, I pulled the fuel gauge out, which is here, and you'll notice this thing will stay still. This is what came out of it. You can see it's really pliable. There it is right there. So this shit was holding in this really nice chrome ring that goes on the gauge. This is what surrounds the fuel gauge, and I'll go ahead and line it up here for us in a second. Here's the fuel gauge, beautifully preserved, I might add. Look at how perfect. I mean, I was really surprised because I was going to buy new gauges for this car because I thought they were really gross. And come to find out, it's just these plastic covers that are sitting on top of them that are actually gross. This thing is perfect. This thing's been preserved for 40 years. This kind of sits like that. This ring here goes over it. So you can see how nice that looks. Well, some genius decided to cut his own glass. This is glass, it's not plastic. And lay it over and then silicone the crap out of the thing so it looks really bad, unfinished, not original. If anyone was curious, the anatomy of what these gauges are when you're actually looking at them in the vehicle, they're really just a fancy piece of stamped metal that's cut in a circular pattern. If you look, I'll kind of turn this to the side. There's the actual speedometer. It's really nothing more than a piece of metal that's decorated nicely on the face. But it's just some mechanisms in there. There's the odometer mechanism right here. I'll try to focus it here for us. Yeah, there's the odometer mechanism. You can kind of see the gears that turn the odometer, which is pretty neat. And then back here, across the back of it, here's where these little bulbs are. That's the bulbs that kind of twist in there, and they get sandwiched in between the circuit board that would go on the back of this gauge rear, I guess you'd call it. And this is the speedometer port, of course, where the speedometer plugs in to make the gauge functional to determine your speed. But this is really just the anatomy of a gauge in one of these 72 Mustangs. I don't know. I know I was curious as to see how they're put together and built, but it might help a few people out. That's the speedometer, and here's the idiot light gauge that would go in the place of where the tachometer would go if you had a Mach 1. And here's basically a nice decorated piece of stamped metal, decaled nicely, that just basically houses some bulbs. That's all it is. And there's the idiot lights. That's where they go. And the fuel gauge is pretty nice. This is a, if I can get some light here. But this is basically just a nice gauge that, you know, is a nice nice stamped piece of metal with some orange needle, which is just impressively well preserved for a 40-year-old vehicle. I don't know why I'm so amazed by it, but, and then of course the two posts for the back that also get sandwiched at the circuit board. So just wanted to do a little overview real quick on how these gauges are set up in here, and if anyone's, you know, curious, getting ready to tear into one of these 72s, you can kind of see the anatomy of the gauges. And one of the other reasons that we pulled the gauges, or that I decided to pull the gauges out, is because they weren't working. They were non-functional. These classic cars use this paper circuit board material that basically distributes the energy from the wiring harness throughout the gauge pod, and it lights up the gauges. As you can see, I mean, my fuel gauge wasn't working or anything, and as you can see, this thing's seen better days. This is where the actual wiring harness plugs into. There's really no plug, it's just this laminated plastic with some copper in between it to actually make the contacts. So this is getting replaced, and it's funny, you'd think, you know, something like this would be, well, I would think something like this would be inexpensive, but this is about 70 bucks right there just to replace it. And at the end of the day, you still get the factory tiny little bulbs that go back into it that illuminate this thing and make it look like a 1970s vehicle. But if you're trying to keep it semi-original, unfortunately, you got to kind of go with it. But yeah, this is one of the reasons why I pulled the gauges out. Let me show you how well preserved these gauges actually are, which is pretty amazing. Here's a speedometer gauge, and I have my light on the camera so you can see that there's absolutely no flaws at all in this gauge face. I mean, the camera really doesn't do it justice of how perfect it is. I mean, untouched for, you know, 40 years, sealed up. I mean, I guess it is going to stay pretty well preserved. And here's the idiot light gauge here. I really wouldn't call it a gauge, it's just a fancy idiot light that shows the temperature, alternator oil pressure, and brakes, and it lights up red. I've never even seen it illuminated because, well, obviously that's bad. So pretty impressive. I'd like to put the tachometer in this car, but they never came with one, and I don't feel like spending 200 bucks for a factory tachometer gauge. So anyway, thought it was a pretty interesting find. I'll kind of document the restoration of this bezel and see if I can't bring it back to life, because honestly, if you look at it, you know, it looks pretty rough, you know, the way it is, but this silicone peels off, and luckily it's not pulling off any of the plastic when I pull the silicone off. So if I scrape out the silicone real nice, kind of sand it down a little bit, and get a nice even coat of fresh paint on here again, and clean it up, I'll be able to reuse the bezel. I'll be able to buy the factory plastic shield that goes over the front of it, and I should have a nice set of original looking gauges again. So anyways, guys, this is a little documentation of the restoration on this 72 Fastback. Go ahead and try to remove these plastic panels here that I was just talking about. You can see that they're pretty well siliconed in there, and I'm going to try to push them out and hopefully not rip my finger open. These things are really in there good. Not cool. I have to go out this way. Just some light pressure on them here. I'm actually going to go ahead and also do another cut around, which I already did. Around here with the razor blade, nice and even, to kind of cut some of this silicone, loosen it up. I don't know who the hell did this or why they thought this was better, going through all this trouble. Seems like a lot of work just to cover up some gauges when you can buy the factory plastic for about 60 bucks. Doesn't make any sense to me. Redneck repairs, I guess. It's in there big time. Just glass. There it goes. There it is. Ugh. There's no way that's factory. No way. That's someone that cut a piece of glass. It's gotta be. I don't see Ford doing that on purpose. Definitely not. And in here is the trim ring. Beautifully preserved, of course. That actually trims out the gauge nicely, like I showed you over here, like the fuel gauge. So let's try to finagle this thing out of here. Careful not to crack it. This plastic is 40 years old. Not the most durable. My huge sausage fingers. Come on. There it is. Damn, whose idea was this? Got it. Here's the silicone. I don't know if that's close up enough, but there's the crap that just peels right off. So I'd say a good 3-4 hours of just cleaning this stuff up, I'll save myself a shit ton of money. You can't even, I haven't even been able to find these rings anywhere. I didn't even know they existed. It's an original Ford piece. You can see it on there or not, I don't know. It's probably not clear. But yeah, these are original Ford pieces here. So let's take a look here. The inside. This is what I'm left with that I gotta clean out. It's this nasty silicone gasket shit that I'll get out of here. But again, guys, if anyone that's been into one of these knows anything about these gauge clusters, I'm really curious to see if this is something that came from the factory or if my suspicion is correct and classic redneck repairs. Let's try to push this one out. Cut this one around. I mean, they did a bad job too of doing this, because this does not look good. Come on. You know you want to go. I'm going to put a glove on. I don't want that glass to break in my hand. There it is. Better safe than sorry. It's definitely real glass. And there she is. Last one's out. With the pile. That's what we're left with. Really gross silicone covered gauge cluster. Let's pop these out of here. Man, I can't believe anybody would do this on purpose. I just don't think people think. I really don't. They just think that it's gonna work. Might as well bolt it in. Don't buy the right parts for the car. Out. There we go. And let's see, that one looks pretty well preserved as well. No signs at all of wear, nothing. Perfect. Well, I guess if anything, that glass preserved these gauges nicely. So now we got our fair share of cleaning this bezel and getting it painted nice and even, getting all this crap and 40 years of grime off of here, and making a nice home for those gauges once again. So I'll keep you guys updated on the progress. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.